Hi, my name is David Cronin. I'm an Irish journalist and political activist. I live in Brussels. I work as an editor with the Electronic Intifada, which is a website focused on Palestine. And I am the author of two books. My most recent book is Corporate Europe. The subtitle is How Big Business Sets Policies on Food, Climate and War. And it deals, as the title suggests, it deals with the power of the business lobby, the big business lobby in the European Union. I'm also the author of a book called Europe's Alliance with Israel. The subtitle is Aiding the Occupation. Both of my books are published by Pluto Press here in London, and they are available in some bookshops and directly from Pluto's website. The website is plutobooks.com. I would like to continue speaking about the European Union's policy on Palestine. Perhaps I will say a little bit now about the historic responsibility of key European Union governments for the Palestinian situation. When I speak about key European Union governments, I am mainly thinking about Britain and France. Britain, as I'm sure many of your viewers are aware, really has a pivotal responsibility for the situation in Palestine. In November 1917, Arthur James Balfour, the British Foreign Secretary at the time, made a commitment to the Zionist movement that Britain would support the development of a so-called Jewish national home in Palestine. There has been some, and there continues to be some doubt about what precisely Balfour meant by the phrase Jewish national home. However, I've recently been doing some research in the National Archives here in London, and I feel that there's no need for any doubt about this question. When this issue was discussed by the Cabinet in London in 1917, Balfour made it clear that he wanted to see a Jewish state established in Palestine. That is what he meant by the phrase a Jewish national home. He meant a state where incoming settlers would have more rights, more privileges than the indigenous population. Balfour himself admitted in correspondence with other senior British politicians around that time that he did not propose to consult in any meaningful way the Palestinian Arabs about this matter. He essentially decided to impose Zionism, to force Zionism on them. This means that Britain laid the foundations for an apartheid system in Palestine. It means that Britain is ultimately responsible for the creation of the apartheid state of Israel. Britain is not alone. Britain is not the only country that is culpable. However, France equally pledged support to the core objectives of the Zionist movement around the same period. In London, if you read the British newspapers, you often get the impression that Britain has a kind of a semi-detached relationship with the European Union. There's a perception given that the Brussels bureaucracy is trying to impose things on Britain. Britain has obviously decided to opt out of certain economic policies of the European Union. However, Britain is intimately involved in the foreign policy of the European Union, to such an extent that I would disagree fundamentally with those who say that that Britain has too little influence in Brussels. In fact, it's the other way around. In my opinion, Britain has too much influence on the European Union's policies, particularly when it comes to international relations. And Britain indeed has exerted a pernicious influence on the EU's foreign policies, particularly when it comes to the question of Palestine. This is particularly true if you look at the whole period of when Tony Blair and Gordon Brown were in charge of the United Kingdom, when they were the prime ministers. When Tony Blair was prime minister, he recommended that the Palestinian police, the internal police serving the Palestinian Authority, should be empowered to arrest and detain without charge members of Hamas and Islamic Jihad. In other words, he wanted to introduce the same kind of internment without trial system that Britain once introduced in the north of Ireland to Palestine. Subsequently, Tony Blair's ideas were adopted by the European Union in their entirety. I think it was in 2005 or 2006, the European Union established a police support operation in Palestine. This I think was the European Union's first so-called security mission in Palestine. The whole idea of this operation was to try and, on paper, the official objective of this operation was to support the development of a Palestinian police force with a view to helping the Palestinian Authority assume the responsibilities of statehood. You know, so in other words, it was presented as helping the Palestinian people to develop the kind of political institutions and security institutions they would need if a Palestinian state was to emerge. But the other objective, the real objective, perhaps, in my opinion, of this operation was really to bolster cooperation between Israel and the internal Palestinian Authority's security forces. That is precisely what has happened. some of the men who have been in charge of the European Union's, some of the police officers who have been in charge of the European Union's policing operation have actually stated that, actually boasted of the fact that they have helped to increase cooperation between the Palestinian Authority's forces and the Israeli occupation. So, in other words, what the European Union is really doing is making the Palestinian Authority more subservient than it already was to the Israeli occupation. What is particularly troubling to me as an Irishman is that I think 4 of the heads of this police operation, it's officially known as COPS, C-O-P-P-S, to date have previously served in a police force in the north of Ireland called the Royal Ulster Constabulary, or its successor, the Police Service of Northern Ireland, the PSNI. The RUC, the Royal Ulster Constabulary, was a largely Protestant police force that was 100% unionist in the north of Ireland, and it was a very contentious police force. It was armed basically to basically what happened. This was described best by a group called the Committee on the Administration of Justice. What they said was that it was inherently divisive to arm one section of the community to police the other section of the community. So what I'm talking about here is that it was inherently divisive for the British state to arm representatives of the Protestant community to police and keep under control the Catholic community in the north of Ireland. We know that the Royal Ulster Constabulary used very contentious tactics in the north of Ireland. The most contentious, perhaps, of these was the fact that they were quite promiscuous in their use of plastic bullets as a crowd control technique. They used them to try and suppress riots, but not only in riot situations. They used them along with the British Army in situations in which children were actually killed by these plastic bullets. They were by no means non-lethal weapons. On some occasions, they proved to be quite lethal weapons. In my opinion, if the European Union is looking for a model of policing to export to Palestine, one of the last models that should ever even be contemplated, it should not. The model of policing that was used in the north of Ireland should not even be contemplated as suitable for export to Palestine. Yet the European Union, in full cooperation with the British authorities, has essentially decided to make use of the expertise, for want of a better word, developed by police officers in the north of Ireland in Palestine. As I said, 4 of the men who have headed the European Union's police operation in Palestine to date have previously served in the north of Ireland, and some of them have also served in Iraq. They've also been involved in the illegal occupation of Iraq. Some of them have actually said, that they want the kind of policing tactics used and the kind of model of policing used in the north of Ireland during the so-called Troubles to be exported elsewhere. One of them actually said that in one of the inquiries that was used in one of the inquiries into the illegal occupation of Iraq. So we know that the European Union has been involved in a kind of divide and rule, a neo-colonial divide and rule game in Palestine, very much in line with what Tony Blair wanted, very much in line with his desires. The police force, the Palestinian Authority police, who have been mentored by European Union police officers, have rounded up and tortured members of Hamas. This has been documented by Human Rights Watch and other human rights organizations. These police forces have been loyal just to one political party, really, in the occupied West Bank, namely Fatah, the dominant party in the Palestinian Authority. The European Union has turned a blind eye to the fact that it has been enabling the widespread torture and oppression of political opponents of the dominant party in the Palestinian Authority. Worse than that, in early 2009, perhaps not worse than that, but what's worse than the fact that the European Union has turned a blind eye is that it actually praised the appalling tactics of the Palestinian Authority's police forces. In the year 2009, the Palestinian Authority's police suppressed protests held in the occupied West Bank in solidarity with the people of Gaza, who were at the time were being bombed by Israel in an all-out offensive. Javier Solana, who was the European Union's foreign policy chief, actually praised the conduct of the Palestinian Authority's police at that time. This is completely outrageous in my view. It's completely disgusting. But it's not, it's completely. But at the same time, we should not be surprised by this. We should not be surprised with the fact that the European Union has been looking for kind of cronies, that it's been trying to make the Palestinians more subservient to Israel. Israel has the dominant ideology of the Israelis is very similar to the dominant ideology that pervades in the West. It's very much one of subservience to big business interests. It's very much one of subservience to what has become known as neoliberalism, to capitalism in effect. So the European Union has really tried to make sure that the same ideology will prevail among the representatives of the Palestinians living under Israeli occupation. So what they have done really is to try and insist that the representatives of the Palestinian people should subscribe to the ideology favoured by the West. For quite a number of years, the Prime Minister in the Palestinian Authority was a man called Salam Fayyad. I should add that Salam Fayyad was not elected to this position, but he was really presented as a kind of darling of the West. Representatives of the European Union praised him at every available opportunity, even though he enjoyed very little support from his own people. Now, why was Salam Fayyad favoured by the European Union? We can get clues for this if you just look at Salam Fayyad's curriculum vitae. Salam Fayyad spent much of his career working for the International Monetary Fund, which is an American and European dominated institution that has really been, for want of a better term, trying to make the world safe for capitalism. It's really been forcing capitalism on the world. It has introduced quite brutal economic measures that have caused misery, that have caused enormous hardship in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and more recently in Europe. It has been involved alongside the European Union in recent times in enforcing quite brutal austerity measures, particularly on Greece, but by no means only on Greece. In my own country, in Ireland, it's also been involved in insisting that cutbacks be introduced, brutal cutbacks be introduced to basic services like healthcare and education. In conclusion, that the European Union has been really trying to dictate who should represent the Palestinian people. It has been trying to make the Palestinians even more subservient to Israel than they were before. It has been doing so without any proper democratic scrutiny. Ordinary Europeans really should be outraged by this. We should investigate what is going on. We should demand answers from the political representatives of the European Union. The European Union has been complicit in Israel's crimes for too long. Thank you very much.